So again, I'm Frank Toohey. Welcome on behalf of our president, Bo Breeden, who couldn't make it tonight. I want to say welcome, and if there's anything I can do to help your stay here tonight, let me know.
Thank you. This is just for recording. First of all, let me just clarify one thing. We've given out index cards at the front desk. We have a Q&A session, which is the last part of tonight's meeting. And Q&A always turns into a Q and comment session where people talk and repeat and tell us everything we know. Right now, that's why we put the index cards out for you to fill in your comment. Put your name and your email address on the back of the index card. We will deliver those to John to take back home, and his staff will help review your comments. When we get to the Q&A sessions, it is truly a Q&A session. We will ask John questions. They're a minute long for you to ask. I have one exception, and that is we have a member of Whitehall Rd who has put together his thoughts, and he will open up the session, and it will be more of a commentary, and then we'll move right into the Q&As. So with that said, I think we're ready to go. I would like to go over the agenda and tell you that we have got Charlie Scarlett, who is the owner of Whitehall and the president of the Brandywine Foundation that manages and owns Whitehall. I have lived in this neighborhood for over 50 years, and until the issue of the legislation by Congressman Sarbanes and Senator Van Hollen, I had never set foot in the driveway of Whitehall, and I've been over there several times. Well, the Broadneck Council has, I always forget to tell you who I am. I'm Pat Lynch, the president of the Broadneck Council of Communities. I'm so into this subject that I'm forgetting. And also, I want to introduce all members of my board. Raise your hand. The Broadneck Council board. There's several who are on travel and couldn't be here tonight, but they all send their regrets because they really didn't want to be here. So, the subject, as you know, is the Whitehall Mansion and the issue of are we going to open that up to a national park? Charlie Scarlett is online through Zoom, and I hope our connection works. Frank has worked on that very hard. And he will give some commentaries at the beginning. And then we will have Kim Tran. Kim is going to give you some very good news about some of the options that State Highway is presenting for the exits off of Route 50 onto the service roads on the south side, and exits 30, 31, and 32, which is good news for all of us, and she's asking for your input on that. Then we will move it to our Congressman, John Sarbanes, and I have many notes. I'll introduce John later on. I want to get going on the agenda. And some of you know how long he's been our congressman, and we are very devoted to him, and we hope we come to a resolution over this Whitehall Road National Park problem. We will end the session, as I said, with a Q&A, and then I believe we're going to shut down at 8:30. I think you have a hard stop, John, at 8:30. And that's about it. So also want to welcome Amanda Fiedler, who's here, our county councilwoman. And I know we have other community leaders here, and I'm not going to take time to introduce them all because we are on a short timeline tonight. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Charlie.
Charlie, you're on mute.
Hi, everybody. I'm Charlie Scarlett. I don't know if you can see me. I hope you can hear me. I am, as Pat shared, president of the board of the Brandywine Foundation. Good? All right. Thank you, Frank. I was born 70 years ago at Johns Hopkins Hospital and came home to Whitehall. So I have spent all of my life at the end of Whitehall Road. I currently live in Illinois, so I'm not there tonight, and hence my Zoom appearance. I'm looking forward to tonight. I'm going to keep my comments brief because I know there's a question and answer session at the end, and I'd rather respond to your questions than blather on. So I'll reserve a lot for the end. But I am looking forward to the conversation tonight. I had the pleasure of hosting the board of the Broadneck Council at Whitehall on Saturday. The rain fortunately held out for us, and so we had a nice walk around and tour through the house, and a very, very nice conversation. A lot of good facts were shared. A lot was learned on both sides, I think. And I also had a Zoom meeting on Tuesday night with some of the neighbors from Whitehall Road and the Peninsula. That also went very well, and there were a lot of good questions and a lot of good answers, I hope. And I'm looking forward to a repeat of that tonight. So we have a bigger audience tonight, and Congressman Sarbanes is there, and he's certainly a lot more of an expert on the CNRA than I am. As I explained to Pat early on, we have, I took over the Brandywine Foundation when my parents died, or when my stepmother died in 2008. And we've been working hard to figure out what we were going to do with Whitehall when we grew up, looking for ways to earn enough money to keep the lights on. And we're doing that, as you probably know, by a wedding venue and horse boarding and a small Airbnb. If we have any capital needs, such as the roof, which is currently leaking, we have to look outside. We got a quote probably about 5 years ago that it was going to cost us about $1 million to fix the roof. That's a little challenging for us to do. Because of that, we have partnered with a number of organizations. We got a small grant from the National Trust for Historic Preservation. We got a $100,000 grant from the Maryland Historic Trust for the roof. And we also were the lucky beneficiaries this year of a $500,000 congressional earmark grant, also for the roof. We learned later on that we have to find matching funds for that, so we're probably not going to be able to use all of it, but we're going to try to use some, put it to good use, and get the roof back in shape so we can continue to preserve. Preservation of Whitehall is our goal. Our primary goal, because if anything happens to Whitehall, of course, we've lost a remarkable treasure. We also are working with a lot of the local organizations to open Whitehall up to the public. We need to do that. The IRS has required that for us to maintain our tax status. And we're trying to figure out what that really means. We are open currently and have been forever, basically, for interested groups that want to come and visit. But we need to be open more, from what we understand. So we have been talking. We're a small volunteer board. We don't get paid. We don't earn anything out of Whitehall. We are just there to preserve and do our best to keep this treasure going for the state of Maryland. We are a small family board. As I said, we're all volunteers. We all have other jobs. We all have other things to do. And we're pretty much at the end of our rope right now with running the events that we have there to pay the bills. In order to open up to the public, we need help. And probably 3 or 4 years ago, we approached the National Park Service about that. Actually, at the suggestion of Senator Sarah Elford. And we've had some very, very good discussions over the years with the National Park Service, and we have since applied to become a Chesapeake Gateway site. And that's not a national park. It is a Chesapeake Gateway site. The property would continue to be owned by us, and it would be open on a limited basis for visitors, hopefully enough to comply with the IRS requirements. But we don't yet know what that will look like. The CNRA, from our perspective, is a fairly new development. I understand it's been going on for years and years, but we weren't part of it until Sandy Point dropped out of the picture, at which point it became apparent that Whitehall might be a good substitute for Sandy Point. And so since then, we've been talking with the senator's office and with the Chesapeake Conservancy, as well as the National Park Service, on ways that we can make that happen. The National Park Service requested the Volpe Center to come and do a study of Whitehall last fall. Volpe Center is part of the U.S. Department of Transportation, and they look at opportunities like this around the country to determine the appropriateness of various sites as Chesapeake Gateway sites. They came and spent a day with us at Whitehall, actually several days, loved what they saw lots of opportunity there, came out with an initial draft report around Christmas time, and in which they talked about things like perhaps a small kayak stand on Meredith Creek where people could launch kayaks and explore Meredith Creek. They also talked about a ferry service coming from Annapolis that would include places like Carr's Beach, the Thomas Point Light, as well as Whitehall. And they talked about the possibility of putting a dock over on Whitehall Creek, because Whitehall Creek is got a lot more draft. It's a lot more protected. Well, there's a lot more boat traffic over there, so it would be more appropriate than Meredith Creek, which has very, very narrow channels. And that's really as far as it's gone. They also talked about the possibility of setting up perhaps a 10 to 15 car parking area to accommodate people coming in. Clearly, they're not talking about massive groups of people. That's kind of where it stands right now. There's been nothing formalized, nothing finalized. We're in very early discussions, and there really isn't anything to answer, other than that. We are excited about the possibility. We see it as a win-win for the community. We are also very, very concerned about traffic. I don't want to see Whitehall overrun with people. There's absolutely no way that we could become an extension of Sandy Point State Park, because we don't have any beaches at Whitehall. There are no beaches. At low tide, there's sand along the shoreline, but there are no beaches. So there's really no way we could become a beach resort for overflow from Sandy Point State Park. Anyway, I'm gonna leave it there. We are, as I say, they're not proposing that we become a national park there. We are proposing that we become a Chesapeake Gateway site, a historic and natural site, not a major tourist destination, but a place where people could come perhaps by reservation or on a very, very limited basis. Because frankly, we don't want crowds at Whitehall. We don't want them any more than you do. I've sat in traffic on Route 50 most of my life, and I don't like it any more than you do. So even though I live in Illinois now, I am totally committed to preserving the sanctity of Whitehall Road and the peninsula. So I'm going to leave it there, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that anybody has later on. And so I'll turn it back over to Pat or Kim or whoever is the next speaker.
Thank you, Charlie. I appreciate it. Charlie took the time to write an op-ed piece. Oh, I'm sorry. Charlie took the... Can you hear me?
No.
Can you hear me? Charlie took the time to write an op-ed piece, which we requested he do, because so much misinformation has been sent out or published, and he wrote a beautiful one, and the Capitol did not publish it. I timed myself this morning. I got through reading it in 3 minutes, but I'm going to defer on that because we've got to get John to meet some time commitments, and we will make that available to you. But he says everything that should be said, and he has completely reviewed some of the comments that have been made and this information provided. So I hope to make it available to all of you. We've sent out as many copies and posted on our website, but we'll continue until you've all read it. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn over to Kim Tran. Kim is our District 5 district engineer for state highways, and she is one of my favorite presenters. She's been here before, but she has some good news for you tonight.
Thank you, Pat. Good evening, everybody. Thank you. I'm actually going to ask you to switch gears just a little bit. Thank you for allowing us to come in and speak with you all tonight, but this is a little bit of a different topic. It's a little bit. Oh, you're going to
You
click it
keep
on?
talking, yeah.
See, I'm
I just wanna make
distracted
sure
now.
we get it.
So, again, I'm Kimberly Tran from the State Highway Administration, the district engineer. I also have with me here tonight our Community Relations Manager, Kelly Bulware. And we wanted to talk to you a little bit about the US 50 service roads leading up to the Bay Bridge. So most of you are familiar and remember the history of what we did over the last year. Just a quick timeline. So a little bit over a year ago in February of 22, our administrator, Tim Smith, came out and spoke to you all about some options of what we might be able to do last summer for trying to curtail some of the congestion and gridlock on the service roads. We piloted a program or a project for 2 separate weekends in August. Throughout that summer, we were collecting a lot of traffic data. And then those 2 weekends in August, we put a temporary ramp signal at the Oceanic Drive, exit 32, on ramp onto eastbound. Higher? Can you see? Can you guys hear? Okay. So we gathered a lot of data. Then when I came back out in October to speak with you about kind of what we garnered from that, what we gleaned from that information. The biggest thing that we gleaned was 2 weekends were wildly different. A lot of it had to do with what happened on the Bay Bridge or weather or whether or not they were in the reversible extra lane situation and things like that. And we wanted to be able to expand something this summer. So whatever we do as a pilot is more than just 2 weekends. Perhaps 4, perhaps 6, it depends. We're still ironing that out. But what I wanted to talk with you about tonight is that we have sort of 3 options, and many of you got a handout on your chair, similar to what is on the board up front. So just briefly, I'm going to go through the 3 options, and what we're going to be looking for is some feedback within the next 2 weeks, and we're going to be listening to that feedback, and then we're going to need to be ironing out the rest of the details to move forward with one of those options this summer. Basically, in any of the 3 options, one thing that I can announce is that we have decided that exit 31, Whitehall, that we're going to be permanently closing that. So it's substandard, it doesn't have a proper deceleration lane. There's absolutely 0 acceleration lane, so it doesn't meet our national guidelines for a safe entrance or exit from a freeway. Looking at historical crash data and frankly a lot of the maneuvers that were occurring during those 2 weekends of August at that interchange, we've determined and we've gotten approval for ultimately closing that. So we still have some work to do to iron that out, reach out to the business community, talk to them, but we do plan at some point this summer to be permanently closing that. Towards the end of the construction season, we will be repaving eastbound 50 through that area, and then the new striping, we'll just have an edge line and that'll be striped across. But it'll physically be closed in some manner, maybe temporarily and then in an ultimate configuration. Anyway, so any of the 3 options will include closing exit 31. So option 1 is basically similar to the ramp signals that we had last summer, except instead of only doing it at Oceanic, it would also go back and do it at exit 30. So exit 32 is Oceanic, 31 is closed, 30 would also have the ramp signal. And if I jump down to option 3 involves those same 2 interchanges, except that instead of a portable signal, red, green, they would just be closed for those periods of those weekends. So, standing in front of many people here tonight, so I'll be careful the way I say it, but we've gotten further clarity and cleared up our question to Federal Highway and have gotten approval that in fact it is okay for us to close those for operational issues during certain periods of high congestion situations during the summer. So that is now an option on the table. Kim,
Question, will they be closed for both exit and in?
No, only the entrance onto eastbound 50. So anybody can still use the service road, but if you want to get back onto eastbound 50, you would have to, at this point, go back to exit 29 and get on at St. Margaret's or somewhere further west. So if you wanted to exit and go use the McDonald's, you'd have to go back to St. Margaret's to continue your trip.
How do you get on at St. Margaret's?
Baydale.
Baydale, I'm sorry, it's called exit 29, yeah. Yeah, so,
Cape St. Clair.
so option number 2, and the way it's shown on there is to turn what I call the northern service road, East College Parkway, the southern service road, Whitehall and Skidmore, to turn the northern service road into eastbound only and the southern service road into westbound only. And there's some limits drawn on there as to where they would be. I understand, and this is somewhat of the reaction that we got, I think, when it was presented before. So we have this taped, right, Pat? So we have a general reaction to that.
1 or 3.
So let me just, before I take any questions, because I don't want to take the congressman's time from the more important agenda item tonight, but those are the 3 options. We are looking for feedback. We do have time for maybe just a couple questions, but then we would ask, there's going to be comment cards in the back, and on that comment card, there's the email address, and you're also able to go to the project page, right, Kelly, where we had it before to submit your comments. But again, within about 2 weeks, we're going to listen to the comments, and then we're going to move forward with one of these options. So let me, yes, sir.
One thing, you got one that you got to talk about also there is Bush.
Bush's frontage, right.
You can get on the 50 through there.
Yeah, like I said, any points further west than exit 30, you would still be able to get onto eastbound 50. Right. So Oceanic is exit 32. 31 will be closed permanently. Exit 30 would have, down here in option 3, exit 30 you also would not be able to get on. But as you go further west, St. Margaret's, Baydale, Bush's frontage, further west you would be able to access onto eastbound 50.
I would like to consider Bush's also being closed.
For now, our options for this summer to evaluate is just for exit 32 and exit 30. We can't keep chasing it all the way back to PG County. So, yeah.
I'm saying, but that's going to cause us back up still in St. Margaret's Road.
And we're stuck in our communities because we can't get out.
What we do know is that some of the things that we found was a lot of folks who are relying on things like navigation apps, Waze, Google Maps, and things like that. As soon as there's a backup on Route 50, it would route you to jump off and use the service road in some manner. Even with that ramp signal, there was still time savings to be had by jumping off and jumping back on at 31, or jumping off and jumping back on at 30. So if they're just shown as closed permanently, first of all, it won't route you there. We're able to work with the navigation companies and show that they're closed during those periods. And there won't be that time gain of jumping back on here. We understand that everyone here understands that there is no solution to the problem until we get extra capacity on the Bay Bridge. What we are trying to do, though, is help some of the gridlock that was occurring in the community. And I think by just doing it for 2 weekends, we didn't necessarily change any driver behavior because it was 2 different groups of vacationers, right? And the rest of them didn't know about it. But if we're actually able to get the word out that this is the way it's going to be for the majority of the summer, people can plan accordingly. They'll know about it, be able to do a little bit more of a media blitz about it, and hopefully, the message is to stay on 50. In the back over there, yes.
Thank you very much. Just to clarify too, this would be partnered with that electronic signage that's out beyond Baydale that talks about stay on Route 50, and would that electronic signage then also say that these exits are closed?
We're still working on, depending on which option gets chosen, we're still working on all the messaging and exactly what's signing. But yeah, our use of like digital message boards and things like that, we're hoping to be able to use a lot more of that this summer.
I'm going to have to shut off the questions because we're on
Yep.
time.
And I apologize. I know this is a big agenda item, but we did want to at least get the word out to the public that we are looking to move forward with one of these 3, and we welcome comments in the next couple weeks.
Please tell us where to comment.
So for the State Highway Administration website is rose.maryland, all spelled out, .gov. we do have a section there that's the SHA project portal page. And under the listing for Anne Arundel County, we do have a webpage dedicated to the pilot, which is the US 5301 Broadneck Service Roads. And on that site, we will be uploading this map, and there's also an email address there where you can submit your feedback and comments to us. And I'll also ensure that Ms. Lynch has that direct information as well for sharing through her distribution.
Can you say that email again?
Sure. So the direct email is SHA input, INPUT, at m.maryland, all spelled out, .gov. And again, that's available on our SHA project page.
For your information, the next general meeting we have for the Broadneck Council, I've already invited Nestor Flores.
They can't hear you.
I'm using my teacher's voice. I thought everybody could hear me. Can you hear me? That our next general meeting for the Broadneck Council will be held here, and we'll either have it in May or June, but it's going to be on transportation. I'm going to have the Director of Transportation for the county, Nestor Flores, come and speak, and I'll have somebody from the state come, and we can go over all the road problems on, certainly on the Broadneck Peninsula. All right, now, I am very honored. I am very honored to have,
Can I put it in my pocket?
our congressman here to speak to us tonight. John has represented Maryland's 3rd Congressional District since '07 for 26 years.
No, 16 years.
Oh, 16. I'm really not scoring tonight. He was born and raised in Baltimore and has had experience working in all the sectors, public, private, and nonprofit. Serves on the House Energy and Commerce Committee and 3 subcommittees that cover health, energy, climate, grid security, environment, manufacturing, and critical minerals. So he's come to the right place to speak to us tonight. He led efforts in Congress to clean up the Bay with a focus on empowering the residents of the Bay watershed to become citizen stewards of the Bay with an active role in restoring it. And as I turn this over to him, I just want to thank his staff people, and we've got Vicki Garcia, Community Outreach Specialist, and Leila Duman, Senior Legislative Assistant, who has been my buddy to get me through this and get John scheduled and here with us all. So with that, turn it over to John.
Thanks very much, Pat. It's great to be here, everybody. Appreciate this opportunity. I want to thank the Broadneck Council. I want to thank the Cape St. Clair Association. I know Bo couldn't be with us tonight, but we've had a lot of good interactions with him and with this community down here. So I really value the opportunity mostly to hear from you tonight. I am going to give some initial remarks just to try to kind of explain how the idea of the Chesapeake National Recreation Area came to be. I very much appreciate the opening comments that you got from Charlie in terms of bringing the perspective of the person who has the responsibility for the Whitehall estate, and obviously, as you can tell from listening to him, very much wants to continue to preserve that estate for all of the obvious reasons, and has a commitment as well to trying to promote some additional access for the public. He mentioned the Gateways program, which has been around for quite a while, and I'm very familiar with that because I've had the opportunity at least twice during my time in Congress to reauthorize the Gateways program. This is a program that looks across, in a sense, the entire Chesapeake Bay watershed and has identified over the years special sites where you can put signage, where you can make sure that the public is aware that these places are available, that they can be accessed. It lifts up sort of the cultural significance of these places and just promotes the profile of the Chesapeake Bay generally. And I mention gateways because in some ways the idea of a Chesapeake National Recreation Area is to try to bring a little bit more consistent and permanent support, sustainable support from the National Park Service for those kinds of sites across this region. Because what I have to do is every year I have to go into the appropriations process and try to get additional dollars to support on an annual basis the Gateways program through the National Park Service. but we'd be in a better shape if the Park Service, in a sense, had taken some ownership on a sustained basis to provide support to those kinds of locations and sites. So the idea of knitting together a number of different sites into a national recreation area, this is not a new thing. I think there's close to 24 of these sites, maybe a little shy of that, across the country. So these are National Park Service units that pull different sites together and kind of elevate them and create awareness around them and provide that critical support that the National Park Service offers, which is both financial, but it's also a lot of expertise. They know what they're doing. They understand conservation. They're definitely, and I'll come back to this later, very respectful of kind of local perspective and insight and so forth. But this has been done other places. And so as you look in this region, and we're talking about the Chesapeake Bay watershed broadly, although Maryland and Virginia are kind of the more of a focus around this, there's a real opportunity to, over time, identify sites like Whitehall, like a site that Charlie and the Brandywine Foundation are bringing forward and saying, we could use this support, we could definitely benefit it. Identify those sites and knit them together. A couple things I want to mention. First and foremost, no one of these sites is being turned into a national park. As Charlie said, Whitehall is not going to become a national park. Whitehall, if this Chesapeake National Recreation Area is put in place, ultimately would be one of various sites across this region that would have the support from the Park Service. So I did want to, since we did provide the handout, I just wanted to guide you through it a little bit. On that first page where it talks, headed by the area fact sheet, there's a little bit of background on how this came to be. The status is we've released Senator Van Hollen and he's sort of leading this initiative on the Senate side. We've released draft legislation, and it is draft legislation, so it hasn't been introduced yet. And frankly, I've been in Congress 16 years, not 26, Pat, but during that time, I've never seen an example of a situation relating to this kind of an initiative where so much public input was built into the process very deliberately. And we did that because we thought if you're going to undertake something like this, you need to get broad perspective from many, many different constituencies. Obviously, tonight we're getting the perspective from a very important community here. But there were many different groups and organizations that were able to offer their insight and perspective into this idea. We put together a working group. This was, I think, a couple of years ago. Isn't that right, Leela? 2 years ago, the working group was put together, even before any particular sites had been identified, again, to kind of pull in people's perspective. And that working group has undertaken this effort for the last couple of years. They helped inform the initial draft of what the legislation would look like. Again, one of the principal things noted in here being trying to bring in some federal resources to support this. Some items that you should note about the draft legislation. So the Park Service, the way it works is the Park Service is not coming in and identifying sites and saying, we want this, we want that. It's the reverse of that. It's local sites, groups, individuals, stakeholders who have an interest in conserving or preserving certain sites, adding them to kind of this list of cultural imperatives, who can bring forward this idea and then partner with the Park Service. or offer to have the Park Service acquire ownership of a particular site. But it's got to be a voluntary process. It can't be, and it would never be, the Park Service going around and sort of identifying and targeting things and seizing on them. So that's a very important point to note. The initial sites that we identify in the draft legislation, in addition to Whitehall, and again, that Whitehall, as you heard, kind of evolved from Charlie and Brandywine coming to the National Park Service over the last few years and sort of waving their hands and saying, can there be a partnership here? But in addition to that, Burtis House in Annapolis, the Thomas Point Shoal Lighthouse, North Beach of Fort Monroe, that's down in Virginia, has also come forward and agreed to be an initial site of this. So moving along, because I want to get to your questions. We have these sites. It would establish a CNRA advisory commission. So that's like permanent commission that would allow for continuing input to the Park Service to make sure that the Park Service is getting the kind of guidance from stakeholders that is needed. I've already talked about the process in terms of how the Park Service would partner. And then there would be this collaboration with the Gateways program, which, as I say, is pre-existing. And I think that would create some very positive synergy between Gateways and this new Chesapeake National Recreation Area. I want to emphasize a couple things that the legislation does not permit, and it's very explicit about this. It would not allow the Park Service, and this is listed here, to impose any additional regulations on recreational or commercial business activities in Chesapeake Bay waters, including any existing water navigation and fishing activities. It would not authorize the Park Service to supersede any state authority when it comes to fish and wildlife management efforts. It would not allow MPS to acquire property from any unwilling landowners, as I said. And it would not allow MPS, the Park Service, to impose any additional regulations governing non-participating private or public landowners. On the back, there's a brief history. I've kind of touched on this. Members of the working group, you can see who those have been over the last couple of years. Let me emphasize before I close, bill hasn't been introduced yet. This is all part of the process. We do know there's a lot of interest in it. The idea for it bubbled up from stakeholders across the region who have the kind of interest and hope and expectation that Charlie has articulated tonight. I will also assure you that according to the National Park Service itself, once this is even enacted, the enabling legislation, which is what we've drafted, Senator Van Hollen and I, there's a long multi-year planning process. On average, it's 10 years from the time you have the enabling legislation to the time this Park Service unit actually comes into existence and is providing the support and knitting together these different locations. The other thing I want to emphasize is that the Park Service, by its own process, is required to consider many, many different things. And among them, and we actually went and looked around the country where they did this, are traffic studies and concerns about traffic. Now, you may have other concerns, and I think, you know, this is your community. You ought to be presenting these concerns and bringing them forward. And if it was my community, I'd be doing the same thing. But I can tell you that the Park Service, by its own rules when it comes to these things, has to consider studies for traffic, what trails look like, what water access looks like, what kind of cultural and natural resource preservation is at stake. They're required by law to do stakeholder outreach. So these are all important components of how these national recreation areas operate and the way the Park Service operates. And so I'm just grateful for the interest. I'm going to stop talking, and I'd love to hear your questions. As I say, this is an ongoing process. But frankly, I think it's one that can bring exactly the right kind of balanced access to a place like Whitehall that Charlie is describing. And he very appropriately noted, there's no way this can be an overflow site for Sandy Point or places like that, because there's no beach opportunity there. This is an estate. It's a very historic estate. It's something we hope can be preserved through this process, and there will be high sensitivity to the concerns of the community as the National Park Service puts together a robust management plan. And that won't only be during that 8 or 10 year period when this thing is getting going as a recreation area. That's an ongoing obligation of the Park Service, to listen carefully to what communities are saying when it comes to this kind of an opportunity. So with that, let me stop talking, and I'll turn it back to you, Pat, to moderate. Yeah.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you all.
I'm going to let Phil Ferrara take over the Q&A period. But we
Everybody hear me?
We have a first person here,
Yeah.
and that's Andrew is going to get up and give.
okay.
Yeah.
Do you have any more handouts?
You just hold it if you don't mind, if you can ask a question. You can speak for long. Speaking first.
Everything is available at,
Thank you.
www.vanhollen.senate.gov/CNRA. You can look in one of your neighbor's handouts on the back.
Say that again a little slowly on the back of your,
Thank you. All of the handouts and a lot more information about the CNRA are available, thank you, at www.vanhollen.senate.gov/CNRA. It's halfway down on the back of the handout. Thank you.
And by the way, we've received 900 comments from the public during this process. So we've gotten a lot of very, very good input. And obviously the comments that we get tonight will all be part of that same process.
Great, thank you. First of all, thank you for being here and listening to these comments and the pending questions. Really appreciate it. My name is Andrew Hosker, and I live on Whitehall Creek and a few houses down from the Whitehall estate being talked about here. So I've had the opportunity to talk to hundreds of individuals and many, many groups of people, and I appreciate the fact that Charlie and Pat and everybody have gotten involved, but there's definitely a few points of feedback that are very important to make sure that you hear as it relates to the concerns of the community. So first of all, I have to start with the process because that feedback is wide. There was draft legislation put in place right before Thanksgiving of last year, and it included Whitehall Estate, and it did not have a single input from this body, anybody that participates in body, or any of the other local groups. So in terms of all these working groups that you listed on page 2, this group is still not in it. It may be in it now, but as of before, it has not been in it until the first listening session occurred in February of this year. So going forward, we'd really appreciate it, because what that does is it seeds distrust immediately, because everybody reads in the paper that, oh, you know, such and such an area did not become a national park, but good news, we found this little inset property, 110 acres, and we're going to turn it over to the federal government and turn it into a national park. That's all anybody could know, and we started searching for answers. We had the first listening session, and at that listening session, not many questions could be answered at all. Simple things like, what does limited access to the public mean? So fast forward a little bit, and Charlie came, and to his credit, Charlie, you still here? Okay, so I was part of the conversation on Tuesday with Charlie, and he also met with Pat and toured the board, as he said. He made a lot of points that I'm not going to repeat out of respect for everybody here, but at that time, he said, these are my goals, and these are the conditions in which I would ever consider giving this property over to what in essence is the federal government to manage, okay? And he said limited access, it was going to be water primarily, if not only. And ever since that initial discussion, lots of questions came up about, well, what does limited access, public access mean? And so if you think about it from our perspective, that property is going to need, Charlie said, $1 million for the roof. It's going to be 10x that to restore that property. My daughter almost got married there. We toured the whole thing, every inch of that property. So does the federal government put in $10 million and have in return an expectation for very limited public access? Well, please tell us what that looks like. That's critical. And so before legislation, which is headed for a summer vote, at least that's our understanding, puts in Whitehall Estate, there are so many questions that we deserve to have answered or understood as to what it means for us. For those of you who haven't been on Whitehall Road, I encourage you, no, I don't encourage you to do that, that's a terrible thing. But I encourage Senator Sarbanes and Manor and everybody else, just like Pat did. It is a unmarked... I've been there. Okay, great. But everybody understands, this is not a marked road. It's a scenic designated lane. And we all walk on it, and it serves a couple hundred homes, and you try to, you have to step aside into the grass as cars are trying to pass each other, and there's horses, there's all kinds of stuff. So to say that at Maryland's #1 choke point already, with a third span coming, that, oh, why don't we go ahead and, as you called it, advertise to the nation that we now have a new national park in this tiny 100-acre piece in between two creeks that have all kinds of families, et cetera, boating, kayaking on there, and we'll run a ferry through there, and we'll open access to the roads. Look, we like Charlie's goals, so please understand, we like public access for the bay. We're privileged to live near it and get to use it. So we're not adverse to the goals, but we don't understand why it has to be the federal government, and if it does, what are the conditions under which we can understand what this legislation would be? And so the concern is, let's pass it first and we'll figure it out later, not to quote other politicians, sorry. No, but seriously, it's like, can we do CNRA, get it done, and then let's work out these critical questions. There aren't that many critical questions about defining access. Is it a reservation system? Where does the ferry go? I can tell you, that ferry will be right across from where I am. There's kayakers, overnight boaters, all kinds of stuff. There's a much better place to put it, but the Volpe Center decided that's where it's going to go. So the input process comes back again, if that makes sense. So just see if, I don't want to repeat anything Charlie said, I'm just going to see if there's anything else. Guess somebody else said, well, there's just not much access. We got to grab it when there's a willing partner. Well, there's 200 miles of the bay and almost 12,000 miles of shoreline. So we need to help Charlie, and we want to save that. We want to save the property. We absolutely do. But can we work together before we pass legislation that says, ta-da, it's a national park? Because you can say, I've heard it's not a national park, but it's going to be run by the National Park Service. Your item on the back of the page says that it won't be sold. National Park cannot buy from an unwilling participant. Charlie's been a great steward, as he said. His family's involved. But if that situation changes, he hasn't lived here since 1991. He may well say, yeah, I'll sell it. Then it's boom, it's a national park. So semantics are gone, and it's a national park. So those are just a small smattering of many, many questions that we have. And the last one is the business model. We don't really understand, like, how is it that the Brandywine Foundation can get the tens of millions of dollars it's going to need to maintain it, and what are the expectations in return? Can you limit it to, Charlie shared that, well, if it's road access, it will only have 15 parking places. Really? I mean, right now for the weddings, it has 150 cars parked there. So these are the details. I'm not trying to, be a jerk or anything like that. It's just that we have to define this for the people that live here and are impacted. And there are safety issues and others that I won't even get into here, but there are times when we can't get out of that road at all, and somebody's having a medical problem. I mean, the cars that are coming in block the road on the way out. So thank you for the time. Pat, sorry, I'm getting the hook. Okay. Sure.
Well, I appreciate those comments, and I appreciate the spirit in which you gave them. Very, very constructive. On the On the working group, just so you understand, because the working group goes back 2 years, it was only able really to identify organizations that had kind of broad representation through the region. It wasn't attempting at that point to identify specific communities. It was more kind of constituencies that had an interest. And it wasn't until relatively recently, in the last 6 months, that particular sites were identified. Since that time, there has been an effort through the public comment process to gather input. And believe me, in those 900 comments, there are many that are coming in from specific communities that have a perspective in addition to some of the constituencies that were part of the original working group offering their perspective. And then this is a process too. I apologize if you feel that you were left out until late in the process. I can sense that would create some angst, and I apologize for that. But as I said, I've not seen previously for this kind of a thing as much effort to gather up public input. It may not have been enough for certain communities. I appreciate that, and I accept that. But the effort was to try to have that broad input. In terms of this question of, Charlie Scarlett and Brandywine Foundation are going to have to decide that they have a certain comfort level with this to bring it forward. Because as I said, the legislation is very specific that you can't the Park Service can't seize property. And we certainly don't want initial sites to be ones that are unwilling to participate. The reason those sites have been identified is in the draft legislation is because the initial expression from those sites was one of interest in being a participant. But again, this is an opportunity for us to process additional perspective and answer questions and factor into how the legislation is being developed. Your question about the business model is a fair one. And when you hear the expense that may be involved in terms of the ongoing conservation of Whitehall Estate, there are some pretty big ticket items there. But frankly, from my perspective, this is one of the reasons having the National Park Service with the resources that it can bring to bear could be a positive for places like Whitehall. Now, what is the quid pro quo? You've asked the question, if there's X million dollars being offered, are you really going to limit it to 10 or 15 parking spaces? Well, that's going to be in the conversation, and you've made very clear your views about what that site can bear in terms of public access. So that's an ongoing part of this management process that the Park Service has to be engaged in. But that's a legitimate question. I can understand why you have those concerns. So let me hand it back to you.
Yeah, I will say in the last month I've had many meetings with Charlie, and I can't say enough about how positive he's been about protecting Whitehall Road. We have to save Whitehall. There's no choice. We have to save Whitehall. We don't want to come in here and build a development over there. We want to save Whitehall.
It can't be developed. It's a land trust.
Oh, we know that, but no, excuse me. There are a lot of easements on that property, but as we've all said, if you get a smart lawyer in there, you can do a lot of damage. So, sorry. The other thing is that we have got to come up with a resolution to protect Whitehall Road. And that is absolutely essential, and Charlie has that at the top of his list. So we're going to take questions now, and I'm going to turn it over to Phil.
Show of hands, please. This lady back here. Right here. Row 3.
I'm curious because I'm a third generation Whitehall Bay, and there is a beach on that property. And if you go out there any weekend, you'll see a lot of high school kids on the weekends. And you can surely get to the water from that beach. So saying there's no beach access, I mean, those of you that have been out there on Whitehall Bay, have you seen the beach? I think it even has a nickname, Boneyard, or, yeah. Is that where you're going to be launching kayaks? Because the other thing is, there is no, currently, 6-mile-an-hour limit, only on the weekends and holidays. My kids are long gone, but I know there are going to be kids that are going to want to get out there and tube and jet ski, and what are you going to do? Because there's a lot of boat traffic. If you come down there on a Saturday, that creek is packed. And I've watched it for close to 60 years. My question is the beach access. Because Charlie's saying there's no beach access, that's not true.
Okay.
There is a beach.
See, I can answer that question because we had that, we discussed that when we discussed that when we walked around. There were 15 of us and many from Whitehall Road. Community leaders. There is a beach that you can some kind of gravel during low tide. During high tide, you can't see a beach. Excuse me, I'm not going to argue with you. Okay. I'm going to maintain the position that Charlie has. He has stated that there are no beach. Now, there's a different definition of what the word beach means. It may mean different things to different people. But what he has stated is there are no beaches, and that is the link to the fact that it's not going to allow water access.
So I'm not going to pretend I'm more familiar with that property than you are, because I'm not. But I will say this: look at it. You can look at it from the other side here, which is the National Park Service's mission is to elevate conservation, preservation, etc., of these important sites. That's what they do, and I think they do a pretty good job of it. So you could make the case that if you have that kind of insight and perspective being brought by the National Park Service, that you're not going to have some of these activities going on that you're worried about or that are going on right now, because it's going to be part of the management dimension of the Whitehall estate. So without knowing what the specific beach access looks like, that's part of the input and management that a Park Service unit could bring to bear in terms of how a particular property that they would have responsibility for would be managed.
One of the things that Charlie had wanted me to tell you all is that he would invite all of you to come over, and he will take you on tours and show you the property. And it was very worthwhile for me because I had never been there before. So that is deferred to the next meeting.
Another question on another subject. This lady back here. Way back.
I'm a resident of the Whitehall Road area, and we live on well water. Okay, so I'm just asking a question. When or if this CRNA goes at the end of our road, what are the infrastructure plans for water? If folks need to use the restroom, or if it's ADA accessible, or I was told like the width of our road was historic and could not be extended. So if school buses are coming down there. So once this happens, whether we have any say in it or not, what are the plans for infrastructure for water, for widening the road, and for potentially bus access down the road? Like what are we looking at?
So as I'm listening to your question and some others, I think what would probably be very helpful, and we'll get this to Pat and otherwise find a way to get it distributed, is to give you some more specific information about exactly how the Park Service develops a management plan for sites like a Whitehall, what goes into that, what kind of considerations, and all the things you mentioned are absolutely part of the consideration that they make as to whether they can bring on board a site like that and manage it up to their standards. So we can get you, we can do that, right, Leo? We can get you some more specifics about exactly the kinds of things that are considered, how they're handled, and we'll also try to just get you examples of how it's been done in some other places that might be analogous, so you can get some sense of that.
This gentleman in front here.
I have a really brief question. It sort of relates to process. I'm not particularly comfortable with the process to date, but from a legislative perspective, I want your commitment that regular order would be the process. That you will in no way be a party to or allow Senator Van Hollen to attach this bill to an omnibus bill. Just as a matter of prudence.
It's a very fair request. It's a very fair request. These days, to be very candid with you, given how sort of difficult it is to get anything done in Washington, while I would always like to see regular order, if there's an opportunity to get something done that we think is valuable from a legislative standpoint, and there's a particular vehicle available to do it, then there may be a lot of pressure to take advantage of that. What I can commit to you is I'll relay that comment back to the senator. I have fully assimilated your comment. We will push to make this as much as we can a bill that goes through regular order. What tends to happen with these kinds of things, these natural resource and park service things, is they can get folded into what's called a lands bill or natural resources bill that is a kind of omnibus, but I would argue that it's on topic, so it's not like just sticking it on to some big hairy dog that's walking through the living room. It's more focused than that. But it's a fair point. I share what is your general irritation with the fact that not a lot of regular order occurs in Washington, so I'm sympathetic to what you said.
This gentleman back here with the blue shirt.
I have a two-part question. The first part is, over a year ago, I sat in this room, I think it was, and we mobilized to try to stop this on the end of Holly Beach Farms Road for the Chesapeake Bay Foundation property. So my question is, why is that no longer the focus, and how were they and or pretty wealthy Bitcoin owners able to defray all of that traffic on Holly Beach Farms to now Whitehall? First question, how that happened. Second question is, if the Brandywine Trust or Foundation gives over this property to the CNRA, who ultimately controls the future development of that site? Is it a group of local stakeholders, or is it a national entity, i.e. Park Service, that controls it? Two questions. Thank you.
So the second one first, the Park Service, if the Park Service owns that property, the Park Service would be making the decisions about disposition of the property, how it's managed, and so forth. I'm hoping that providing you all with some more specific information about what that management process looks like will give you some better understanding of that and maybe some assurances around it. In terms of Holly Beach, you're right that at some point there was a discussion about whether Holly Beach would offer itself up to be one site of a number of sites within the Chesapeake National Recreation Area. That proposal doesn't seem to be live anymore. The status, I think, of Holly Beach is one that is not yet ultimately resolved just within kind of their own orbit, let alone being connected to a CNRA. So that's not really within our scope right now. But I don't think the decision for them to pull back from it had anything to do with the notion that somehow now this can be offloaded onto Whitehall. I think it was a completely independent decision, and the Whitehall participation in this is coming from its own source, which is the interests of Charlie and Brandywine to make this connection to the Park Service, which again we hope is one that can be constructive.
Yes, the Chesapeake Conservancy withdrew from support of Holly Beach Farm. We have Ann Beach here, who is a resident of Holly Beach Farm and worked very hard to get Holly Beach off the list. That was a decision made by Gavin Buckley and by Stuart Pittman. It's still listed if you look on the potential park sites for the National Park Service, but it is off the table right now.
The lady in red.
Hi, we also live on Whitehall Creek, literally across the street from across the creek from Whitehall Manor. So I agree with this lady. Boat traffic galore. Nobody has said anything about noise, wastewater treatment, and there's houses that are getting built on marshlands. We're looking at the bank eroding. Nobody has cared. My dad, who is 97, is still alive and has lived in that house 60-some years, has written numerous letters. Nobody cared. Why do you expect me to believe that you're going to care? You're talking about putting a dock on, increasing the traffic in front of my house, increasing the noise and the waves. Why should I even believe you? Because nothing has been done in the past and nobody has cared. And I agree we need to save Whitehall. I mean, nobody wants to see that turn into development. I understand that. But as a person living there, it's gotten the weekend's a mess already.
I can't answer all the questions you're asking me tonight, but I would invite you to consider that the National Park Service, given what it's there to do, what its mission is, could be an ally with respect to some of the things you're concerned about, rather than viewing it as imposing some additional burden with respect to some of the issues you're raising. You could have a pretty substantial ally in pushing back on some of the things that imperil the conservation and preservation of what is a very beautiful part of this county. And I have been there to see it. And so, you need to sort out that you have some level of confidence and assurance that this is going to be a net plus, not a net negative. And I understand that there's more information that we can offer to provide that and give you that perspective. But I, for one, would be in the ear of the National Park Service if they've got responsibility for managing a site like Whitehall. If the kinds of things you're talking about are happening, and saying to them, this is now part of your responsibility to make sure this stuff is not happening. So again, it's a long process, the way they do it, and we'll try to get you as much information as we can about all of the different considerations.
My name is Spencer Johnson. I live in St. Margaret's Landing and have for the last 22 years. The only way in and out of our community is on Whitehall Road. And when that traffic, and I applaud the closure of exit 31, not only is it an accident waiting to happen, it's happened to me. But if you've experienced the traffic, the backup on the service road from Friday to Monday, at my age, which is 82, you have to wonder if my wife called an ambulance on Friday, would it arrive before Monday? And it's really a concern, I think, for our entire community.
How about right after I'm done, you go? Does that work? My question is, since there seems to be a lot of basic access questions that are still out there, could you take Whitehall Estate and not list it as part of the CNRA until these basic access questions are answered? Because there's just so many details that are not there. So could you take it out?
So there is a kind of chicken and egg dimension to this, which you're pointing to, which is that you do when you create the enabling legislation to convey that it's a real opportunity, that there's a there. It's good to have some initial sites listed to demonstrate that it's just not completely made up. But I think your question goes more to the dynamic and the conversation that that Charlie is having now with the Park Service, his own sense of confidence or assurance about what this could look like. And that all is, I think, benefits from the comments that we're getting here tonight as well. So, you know, the sites that have been listed so far in the draft legislation are listed because there was enough interest coming behind them to be kind of part of this initial mix from those who have the ownership or control of them, that we thought it made sense and it could be useful to have them be part of that initial thing. But that's a conversation. I mean, the people have responsibility for this, and the people, and I think it sounds like it's everybody in this room who care about the Whitehall estate and want to see it preserved and sustained. There has to be some comfort level there as well, for sure. Now, what's going to happen is I'm going to probably have to leave in the next 5 minutes, which means there's people that didn't get to ask a question and they're not going to be happy about that. I understand that. And I've extended a little bit more already, but in terms of the next obligation I have, I will tell you this. You are welcome to send comments in through the portal that Senator Van Hollen's established, but you can send them directly to me through my staff, through my office, through the connection that Pat has established with my office. And I will pledge to you and guarantee to you that those won't stop with staff. I will, any question that you want to ask and you get to my staff, I will hear that question and I will do my best to respond to it. And I think there will be themes. There's already been themes to the questions here tonight, and I'm getting that. I appreciate it. And so we can kind of create categories of information that we can offer back to you, hopefully, that will help continue a productive process on this.
Right here. Hey!
Good evening. Number one, this is too short of a meeting, number one.
Yeah.
Number two.
Why do you gotta leave?
The question is, for me, stakeholders. I keep hearing about stakeholders. My family goes back 400 years. My family goes back, you hear me, 400 years. And my family goes back nearly 400 years, and not once have we been listed as a stakeholder. That's
Come on now.
That's not. Nobody, not one stakeholder represents my point of view or my family's point of view. They do not. I should be a part of the stakeholder. There's other people in here too. The Whitehall plantation, Whitehall Mansion should be maintained, definitely. It's a former plantation, and my ancestors were part of those enslaved. Not once, from Donald Schaefer's Reach the Beach to Hogan determining that the only span can be at Skidmore, to now, do they even act like we matter at all? And so my question is, where do we fit in? Where do we fit in? How should we trust anyone who has never acted like us living there matters? That's my question.
And if I could just add to that, I know you have to go, Senator, but I think it's so relevant because I like those in Brownswood, Mulberry Hill, Skidmore, Clay Hill, places some of you have never heard of. We've been there for 400, 150 of my family. And it's important that not just preserve the mansion, but to ensure that our stories are in that mansion that reflect what contributions we made to this area. It's not told. We have so many famous people who come out of this area that look like me. Al Green, the first professional PGA player. I mean, I could go on and name Reverend Samuel Green, the first supervisor at the Naval Academy. Those stories aren't included. So we are here to ensure, we want to know that our stories are told. As much about this mansion, about the Chesapeake Bay Bridge, where we were around in 1952, we want to make sure our stories are told.
I'm very happy that those were the two last questions I have time for tonight. And the reason is that I can tell you, and it was an omission on my part in my initial comments. But I can tell you that for both Senator Van Hollen and myself, the driving motivation behind establishing this Chesapeake National Recreation Area was to bring attention to these stories. I mean, if you talk to Senator Van Hollen, it's the first thing he says. And it should have been the first thing I said tonight. But there are powerful stories that go back decades, if not centuries, that have been left out of the history of these places. And through the Gateways program, we've seen that the National Park Service has the capacity to start telling those stories in a compelling way. And I see one dimension of the Chesapeake National Recreation Area being to tell those stories and to bring resources and support and expertise to the way they're told and the way they're memorialized and the way they're connected to the present day. So that is a core motivation behind this effort. Now, again, we will collect any input and questions you have subsequent to this. Let me just close by thanking you all for the opportunity to be here. We tried to get it scheduled a few times, Pat, and I appreciate your indulgence with my schedule because it kept conflicting with both. But this is a very important part of the process. This is a very proud community, set of communities down here. Certainly have come to understand that during the time that I've represented Broadneck and Cape St. Clair and this beautiful part of Anne Arundel County and Maryland. And I appreciate the conversation tonight, and I hope that we can continue to have this going forward. So thank you all for the opportunity to be here.
And thank you all for coming. I think we need another meeting after this one, and we will schedule it and get back to the same question. Thank you.